And then I would just like to introduce Jan and Janet from the People's Resource Center. I will let you both introduce yourselves and take it away.
Oh, thank you, Matt. I'm Janet Terranova. I'm the manager of the Job Assistance Program here. And Jan is also with us. She's one of our volunteers, and she and I are going to be presenting the material to you today. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Can you guys see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, great. Oh,
It went away.
I don't know what just happened. Now it went away. Let me try again. Okay, here we go.
All right, cool.
Everybody can see that?
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so welcome. Again, we are with People's Resource Center, and we offer services free of charge to residents of DuPage County. So we're happy that you were able to join us today. And I want to tell you a little bit about PRC. Here's our website at the bottom here. It's just peoplesrc.org. And I'll get into that a little bit more. But before we start, just some guidelines for the virtual workshop today. It is easier during the presentation if you can mute yourself. That way that takes away any, unexpected interruptions or distractions in the background that we can all pick up on. We'd love for you to turn on your video. It makes us feel like have an audience out there and that we're talking to somebody, but of course it's not required. So if you're not comfortable, that's okay too. And then if you have any questions, you can use the chat function that's kind of on the bottom of your screen there, or you can hold on to your questions at the end and we can talk about those. And at that time, Matt will also turn off the recording so that everything is confidential. People often prefer the side-by-side mode for easier viewing during the presentation. And again, everything that's said during the presentation will be confidential. So People's Resource Center, some of you may have heard of us. If you have, you are probably most familiar with our food pantry, but we offer many other services as well, including the Adult Learning and Literacy Program, also an art studio and a closed closet that is run out of our Westmont office. We have Computer Training and Access, who we work very closely with. We get a lot of referrals for them, and we send a lot of our jobs clients to them as well. We have a whole social services program. And of course, we're here today representing the Job Assistance Program. We offer one-on-one coaching, resume writing, helping with applications, practice interviewing, and we also have a job board that I have on our website that actually anybody can view, and you're welcome to check that out as well. Okay, so we're here today with the Is This the Right Job for Me workshop. So when you are applying for a job, obviously you're going to go in for an interview, and what this presentation is more about is the questions that you can ask to determine if the job is the right job for you. So this isn't so much about finding any job. It's more about finding the right job to ensure that you're going to be happy there and you're going to stay. So let's talk about reasons why people work. So there's a lot of different reasons. This is a chart here that shows like our hierarchy of needs, which is really what dictates our behavior, and kind of decides, what kind of job we may like and where we want to work. So usually people want to work. Of course, the most basic needs is to provide for themselves and for their family. But we all want to get a job where we're going to feel happy, we're going to feel content, fulfilled, because we want to stay, right? We don't want to get a job and then leave 6 months later and just job hop constantly. So again, you want to find something that's going to be long-term for you. So something that's going to have an impact on you, somewhere where you're going to be happy and use the skills that you have, perhaps you have an education or qualifications. All those things are reasons why we need to go to work. So what you need to do is figure out what's important to you, where your priorities are. So let's look first at employee turnover statistics. So why employees are leaving the jobs that they go to. So these are just some interesting stats for you to kind of think about, but 30% of job seekers leave a job within 90 days of starting. So that's like, 3 months. That's really quick when you think about it, like 3 months at a new job, that's just enough time to kind of get settled in. 32% of employees plan to change jobs this year. And then 66% of workers say they've accepted a job only to realize it wasn't a good fit, with half of them quitting within the first 6 months. So again, that's really quick to not stay at a job for even a year. And think about the stress that goes into searching for a job. I'm assuming many of you are here today because you are job searching and maybe actively applying. And I would agree that it is a stressful process. So think about, getting a job and what joy you feel from that, only to find out that 3-6 months later, you're going to start all over again. We don't want that. And the employer doesn't want that either. It's very expensive for companies that have a high turnover. They found that on average, it costs $2,700 to $4,400 per employee every time they leave. I think that's like a 6-month salary, 3 to 6 month salary range. Excuse me. So again, people that start a job only to leave shortly after, it doesn't benefit them, and it certainly doesn't benefit the employer either. So this chart kind of talks about why employees leave. It breaks it down a bit more, with the number one reason being, I'm not satisfied with my current salary. So the number one reason being pay. But right behind that is not getting the right benefits. And then COVID, which would be, a relatively new reason, is mixed in there as well. And then the other ones are more about the environment. They want a more flexible work schedule. Maybe the culture isn't right for them, or maybe they have some other obstacle on the side, childcare, senior care, transportation, things like that. But what's interesting when you really break this down, with the exception of COVID, all of the other reasons here that are listed are things that could have been determined before they accepted the job, right? You know what the salary is before you accept a job. You know what the benefits are, you know what the schedule is, or at least you should. So if these are things that are important to you, you have to make sure that you're asking these questions before you accept the job. And not only ask the questions, but really evaluate if it's satisfactory to you. So if you have a minimum pay that you require, and then you end up taking less, you have to realize that may not work out for you. It may not be the right job for you. If your priority is a flexible work schedule and the company that you're looking at doesn't offer that, that may not be the right job for you. But again, this all involves a little self-assessment and asking yourself, what is the most important thing to me when I'm looking for a job? What are those priorities? So the way that you're going to do that and figure out how to make the best decision for you is to make a list and make a personal inventory to understand what is the best job for you. Now, this is going to be different for all of you because this is really a personal thing. What works for me may not work for you. What's important to me may not be important to you. So this is only something that you can answer and really think about, and again, self-assess. So what kind of personal limitations do you have? Now, that can mean a lot of things. That could mean maybe you have a disability, maybe you don't have transportation, maybe you have a childcare issue. Those are all different kinds of limitations or obstacles that you may have to consider when you're looking for a job. And then what's most important for you to you in a new job? Again, we talked a little bit about that. That could be pay. It could mean maybe a steady income, not so much what it is, but at least that it's going to be steady. You can count on it every single month. Job security, career advancement. Maybe this is a stepping stone and you want to keep moving forward. Work-life balance, I'd say that's a really big one lately. You need time to balance home and work, and that usually comes with a flexible work schedule as well. So think about those things, all the things that are important to you, and rank them in order. And honestly, you need to just make a list, write it down, put it in priority order, starting with your most important. And then when you really look at the list, you realize that that's a starting point. That's how you're going to direct your research, when you look at the company to find out, what they advertise, what they're offering. And then that's how you're going to form your questions also during the interview. So when you're looking at a company that you're thinking about applying to, you want to make sure that you research that company. And there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. The first thing I would suggest is going to the company's website. Once you're on their website, you can go to their mission statement and their values and make sure that that's in alignment with what you believe. If it's not, and it's really conflicting with your own values, you may consider looking elsewhere, because in the long run, this may not be the right job for you. Social media channels is a good way as well. You might want to go on LinkedIn and check out, any posts that they make. What are they supporting? Who's following them? Maybe you can even link up with somebody that works at the company and ask them their perspective of working there. You can also read reviews, though I would caution you with reviews, just to remember that people often take the time to write a negative review, but not so much a positive one. I definitely think it's worth looking at it, but you may not want to put, all your stock into that. And then also you can just do a quick Google search and research any headlines about the company. Now, aside from that, what people don't think about all the time is asking the right questions in the interview. Excuse me. So it's not, at the end of the interview, typically towards the end, the employer will look at you and say, do you have any questions for me? This is your time to ask some really good thought-provoking questions to figure out if this is the right job for you. So it's not just about filling that time and, filling the air with some generic questions. Use it to your advantage. Go back to your list about what's important and ask the right questions. And this is where you're going to really pay attention to how they answer, what kind of words they're using, their body language, and just looking for those signals to see if this is, again, in alignment with what you're looking for. And we're going to give you some examples. Before we get into that, there's a little bit of a disclaimer that not every job will offer the same perks, benefits, privileges. So, again, that's going to depend on what you're looking for and what's important. For example, if you want to be a nurse, it's probably unrealistic to ask for a work from home option. Okay. So like when we talk about working from home, just understand that that's not going to fit for every single job. A customer service job, maybe not working from home or flexible hours. So it really depends on the company and what kind of industry you're looking at. But there are some basic needs that everybody expects, from their job and from their employer. And the employer would also agree, like that you expect to be paid on time, that, they show respect to their workers, there's equal treatment, that you feel safe at work, and that there's sufficient and open communication, and that there's recognition of your efforts. Those are all like some of the basic needs that people want when they go to work. Okay, so now we're going to go just a little bit beyond that and talk about your needs and what the right questions are that you need to ask during the interview. So let's think back to that chart about reasons why people leave, right? The number one reason, if you remember, was salary. So how can we figure that out before we accept a job and then end up leaving because the salary wasn't right? You need to ask questions. So it's okay to talk about salary, and you should talk about salary, but you don't want to talk about it too early. You want to be tactful. So you don't want to come in, let's say your first interview is a phone interview. You don't want to start off with, I want to know what you're going to pay me. That's a little too forceful. And typically you wait until you're further along in the interview process, until you're a serious candidate, before you're going to start talking about money. Understand your position and what your responsibilities are so that you can make a good judgment of what kind of salary you're looking for. Another way to do that is to research what other companies are paying their employees for people in the same position as you. You can look up this information like on Glassdoor or Onet online. So again, before you go in there, make sure you do your research so that you have something to back it up. If you have reasons for asking, above that salary, just make sure you can justify that. So maybe you have an extra long commute, or maybe you need to relocate. So as long as you can justify that, that's okay to do that as well. Just make sure that you're grounding your questions, in the research that you did, and you seem enthusiastic and that you're skillful. And that's the way to start broaching the topic of salary. So some of the questions that you might ask at that time when they say, do you have any questions for me, is finding out if the salary is hourly or annual. That could be the difference in whether or not you're going to get overtime or not. Asking the salary range is a great question because it kind of puts the onus on them to give you a range, and then you can kind of work within that range that they're talking about. And it also shows that you're flexible if you're working within a range. Asking how that salary number is determined is a good question when maybe you feel like you're off in what you thought that salary should be and where they are. So how is that salary determined? And maybe that'll shed some light on that. And then again, you can look at how that compensation compares to people doing similar roles. And then asking what aspects of the salary are negotiable is a great question as well. So a good example of that is, for something that you can say is, the job posting listed a salary range between X and Y. Can you give me an idea of where my skills and background might put me within this range? So you have a range, and now you're asking them to even narrow that range a bit more. Sometimes their range can be, a $15,000, $20,000 range, and you want to bring that a little bit closer so that you know what you're really working with. Are you going to be at the beginning of that range, or, the lower end or the top end? So here's a couple more examples. You may ask, what will the scope of my responsibilities be? If they say something like, you'll wear a lot of hats, you can read into that and understand that that means you're going to do your job, and you're probably going to take on responsibilities of other people as well. For whatever reason, usually that means they're short-staffed and you're going to have to pick up the slack from other people. Doing the work of 3 people, but that doesn't mean they're going to pay you for doing all that work. So again, asking these questions and considering their answers is really what this is all about. Looking for those red flags, looking for the signals, and interpreting what they really mean by these answers. So another example would be, what is the salary range for this position? Which again, is a really great question and one that is often used. If they say, we're looking for employees that have a passion for their job and aren't as concerned about a paycheck. So what they just did there is they kind of avoided your question. They also implied that you might not have passion, and they never really answered it. So you should prepare to be underpaid at that point, because if they're not telling you a number, that usually means that it's not something that they're either proud of, or they realize that they are coming in lower than what other people are getting paid in that same position. So another one of the reasons why people leave is benefits. So let's talk about this as well. Again, benefits is usually something that you talk about later in the process. Again, when you're a serious candidate, and that could usually mean like your second or third interview, when you really feel like you may be getting an offer here. So again, don't be afraid to ask, but don't be greedy either. When you do work it out, make sure that you get everything in writing. And again, that you're making compromises according to your personal needs and benefits. So remember what I said in the beginning, for each of you, what's important is going to be different. So benefits is a great one when you want to think outside of just your paycheck. So maybe the salary is there, or maybe you can give a little bit on salary if you're going to get some other things in exchange. So when we talk about benefits, you often think healthcare, but there's so much more now outside of that is usually negotiable. And that can mean when your benefits start, vacation time, work flexibility. Can you work from home? Can it be hybrid? Can you flex your hours? Can you get more vacation time? Tuition reimbursement is a big one too. So if you're looking to advance your education, and that's a great question too, because it shows that you're looking to develop in your position as well. Parental leave, if that's something that you need to consider, reimbursement, stock options, a wellness program. I used to work somewhere where there was a wellness program, and they would give you like $150 if you participated. So those are all really great questions to ask. And there really is a lot of benefit questions. So, and again, because there's so many, there's just a slew of questions, and you don't want to go in and ask all of these. These are just some examples depending on what's important to you. So again, you want to find out how much sick time, vacation time, holidays. Those are usually the basic ones that they're going to provide upfront to you. And you should ask when PTO begins to accrue and at what rate, because usually you don't get it, the minute that you start working. Insurance coverage, if there's other, health insurance plan options, the premium cost. Again, you can look through some of these as well, retirement plans. So again, think about your priority list, what's important, and what kind of questions you should be asking. So here's some great examples. What type of training should I expect? So again, you're applying for a job and you want to know what kind of training when you start working. And they say, well, we're looking for someone that's a self-starter. So that's a little bit of a red flag to me. What that means is they don't have someone to train you, and they want, as a self-starter, they want you to take the initiative to figure it out on your own. So that might be okay for some people, but other people may work better when they receive that training. Most of us do work better with that training, but you should definitely consider that. Like, okay, if I start here, I may be kind of left on my own to figure this out. So you need to, ask yourself if that's okay. Another question be, what resources and benefits do you offer to support employees? If they say something like, well, we offer a comprehensive benefits package that I'm happy to review with you, is there something specific that you're interested in? This to me is a green flag. This sounds like somebody that obviously values their employees, and they make sure that employee wellness is a priority, and that they're going to communicate this during the hiring process. They're not hiding anything. They are offering to show it to you and review it with you. So that's a good sign right there. And at this point, I'm going to pass it over to Jan, and she's going to talk about work schedules.
And the two things that employees of mine always were most concerned about, pay and schedules. Those two things, you never wanted to make anybody upset, because those were the two things that were the most important. The benefits are important and all of that. But boy, schedules and salary, those two were right up there as priorities for my employees. And I understand that they were mine as well. But start with the specific specific and straightforward request if you are going to look at negotiating your work schedule, and negotiate up front, not after you start the job. As Janet said, all of this should be identified, determined, negotiated before you actually sign on the dotted line that you're a new employee. Emphasize how your employer will benefit from the change, not necessarily right away how it will benefit you. You don't want to interview potential employees and their first question is, I need a job and I need this and I need to be flexible and I need childcare issue. No, that turns off an employer. You want to emphasize what can you do to help your employer benefit from you coming on board. And flexible work offers tremendous benefits. We saw that with COVID and coming back into some remote work. It reduces stress, improves productivity. There's higher job satisfaction. And the next slide talks about some of the flexible types of work schedules that we have. Flex time, meaning you can work part of the day and then add those hours another day to make up for those hours per week. Part-time position, remote work. Janet talked about that has become so popular. So many of the office buildings in downtown Chicago are empty because everybody got used to remote work. They liked it. They were just as productive, if not more productive. And employees are very comfortable now with remote work. A compressed work week really means you put your 40 hours into maybe 3 long days or 3 long days and then a few hours to make that 40-hour work week. And then of course, shift work, as you know, is either mornings, afternoons, or if it's a 24-hour company, it would be evenings as well. And then of course, job sharing. That's something where I've done all of these, by the way, types of flexible work schedules. And job sharing is kind of nice. That's when you're working a full-time job with one other person who's also a 0.5 or part-time. So you share that. In fact, my nephews do that. They're brothers and they come in. One works 12 hours and his brother comes in and the next 12 hours and they just kind of keep going. The next slide is interview questions about work schedules. So if I were to be offered the job, what would my average day or week look like? And, some jobs, as Janet talked about, are different than others. So, you may not, every day may not be the same day, but what does an average one look like? And what does a typical schedule look like for someone in this role? You want to ask their policy on remote work, because if you're just as productive and you don't have the travel time and you're perfectly comfortable doing that, that's ideal as long as the work entails the ability to do remote work. Not every job does. And then how do employees prioritize work-life balance? That's one you want to be a little careful of at first. And you want to always prioritize your work-life balance. That should be your top priority, but it's not the employer's responsibility for you to have work-life balance. You need to make sure you know what this schedule is, what your responsibilities are going in, so that you can work on work-life balance. Next slide is examples. What is the pace of work at your company? And of course, work hard, play hard. That would be a red flag. Prepare to be worked so hard that your only option is to quit. Well, then you're back to the drawing board. You're back to looking at another position in some other company, perhaps. So, again, red flag. Is the work schedule flexible? Yes, we support work arrangements, but we expect you'll be employed at least 6 months before we commit to that type. I think that's very possible and makes a lot of sense. And the reason is because the employer really doesn't know that employee until they start working. They give their best self in an interview process, and they're either sort of called out of the process throughout that interview process. They either make it through the second interview and then final interview and then job offer, or they don't. And even if they have a job offer, even if they start, and I've had employees who have interviewed beautifully and you thought they're going to be a stellar employee, and the fact of the matter is they really were not. So you have to know that employee and give, I think it's incumbent upon the employer to evaluate in 6 months. And if that employee feels like they feel like the employee is responsible enough to take on the flexible arrangement, then that's fine. But I think that does, or maybe 3 months probation, doesn't even have to be 6 months. But I think it should be some time where you get an idea of how that employee is going to operate. The next one is culture. This always was fascinating to me, because employee culture is embedded or baked into an organization, and it's almost impossible to change employee culture. It takes years and years and lots of people that, but the attitude and behavior of a company and its employees is basically what the culture is. And that culture has to be values and ethics oriented for you to be comfortable working in it. You have to have employees in management that work with each other, that are honest and ethical, that they treat each other well, they're respectful. And that's how things really get done in the workplace. And the next slide defines these core values and beliefs. I have always talked about it in my work as having a values clash. And if there are values with how people are treated, or employees or patients, in my case as a retired nurse, are treated, and those are different from your values, that's values clash. And then you have to identify whether or not that's an environment you want to continue to work in. Because it impacts the performance and the employee well-being. Good, strong company culture increases retention, defines the company's identity. And so the next slide is important, because when you're asking about workplace culture, you need to ask the employer about their personal experience. And I am all for trying to find people who work there currently or have worked there and get their perspectives on that. Because again, workplace culture is kind of baked in. You don't change it easily. So you need to do your research and make sure the company's culture is one you're comfortable working in. Look at the company's social media channels, see what the types of content they post, look at Glassdoor reviews, search out current or former employees, as I mentioned, or even headlines about the company. You don't want your company's headlines to be the headline of the Chicago Tribune with something that's nefarious or against the law. You don't want anything like that. Cultural fit matters. You'll be happier and more successful if there's a good match. So really look into that. This is as important, to be honest, if not more important, than salary and benefits and even your schedule, because this is the sort of the backbone or the blueprint of the company that you're going to be working. And the other things change when you get more comfortable in the job and perhaps get raises. Benefits change, they come and go, but culture, I've always thought it's one of the most important things. So interview questions: how would you describe the culture? And one thing I would suggest to all of you, when you have these questions that we are suggesting here, look for nonverbal communication, because sometimes it's a lot more enlightening than the verbal communication. It tells you even more. And see how they react to that. What do you like best about working for the company? Ask about their management style. One thing you would change about the company if you could, they may or may not answer that depending on where they are in the hierarchy. If they're at the top, they probably would be comfortable. If it's a middle manager, they have to be careful about saying what they would change. It has to be a company that's open to new ideas, and then I think they'd be more comfortable. How do you celebrate employee success? How do managers motivate their teams? What are your company values? And what you want to hear is trust, respect, ethical behavior. When and how do people give and receive feedback? That's important too, because a lot of places will ask for feedback from people you work with. It's called 360-degree feedback. And then that feedback goes to the manager, which is part of your evaluation. So a lot of different ways to give feedback. And is it a collaborative environment, which you always want, at least in my opinion, you always want an environment where everybody's ideas are good. The more diverse, the better, actually. And the next slide talks about inclusion and autonomy. Inclusion, we're committed to it. And what are you doing to ensure the workplace is inclusive? How are you measuring it? In other words, is the company walking the talk or just giving it lip service? Because it's easy to say you're inclusive, you're diverse. That's pretty easy. But you want, as you're walking around, if you have a tour, look around and see, is there inclusion? Is there diversity? As far as the value of autonomy, which decisions would you expect me to make? Which decisions would you want me to escalate to you? And that's essentially a question that's focused on someone who's going to be reporting to the person who's who they're interviewing with. And I was in a position where I was a manager position, and unbeknownst to me, the director really didn't want me to make decisions. She wanted to make them all herself. And I thought one day, maybe I'm not in the wrong job, because there's really not a reason for me to be in this job. So I moved on to another job. And the person who replaced me had the same issue. So if you want me to make a decision, you know, you have to let me. And if you want to make the decisions, let me know that too. Trust but verify that you'd be empowered in this decision-making authority, because sometimes you are, sometimes you aren't. When discussing care responsibilities, this is one where you have to be kind of careful. First of all, people cannot ask what your child care or elder care responsibilities are. It's against the law. And so they really don't. They still sometimes ask about salary, and that is a new law in Illinois that says you can't ask about salary either. So people are, you know, more open to asking about ranges. But our advice is don't bring up your family status, especially in the early stages of your job search. It's none of their business. They can't lawfully ask. And if you want to be more candid, after you've been offered the job, personally, I would say after you're in the job. And again, you've already managed to care for the responsibilities on your own. It isn't the employer's job necessarily to take care of your children or your elderly parents. So you have to make those arrangements yourself. What you don't want is to say this need too soon and have yourself out of the job possibility because of the care responsibilities that you might have. But some of the questions for interview are, if I were offered the job, what would my average day or week look like? How much travel is required, if it is a job that requires travel? And would you describe the company as family friendly? That sort of gets to it but that also gives them a little bit of a red flag that there's care responsibilities. This is mostly for women. I think women sort of take the hit with this more so than men. But if you do want to describe the company or have them describe the company as family friendly, you have to be a little careful getting around that. How do most employees balance childcare with their work? And again, be a little careful with that. I would get the job and get settled, and then there might be opportunities to do some flexibility with childcare kinds of things. Red flags. Janet alluded to some of these. Constant rescheduling, disorganized or late. I interviewed for a job many years ago as a diabetes educator at a hospital in this area. And I was there on time. I was there with my resume, and there really was no real interest in anybody interviewing for the job. And so I stayed and I answered their questions, but they were late and they didn't have probably really read my interview, honestly, or my resume. And it just was one of those, you know, you're sort of thinking to yourself, this is not going well. And they, you know, basically I left, and I don't know, I don't remember if they called me back or not, to be honest, but I thought, I'm not working here. There's too many red flags. So constantly rescheduling, disrespecting others by coming in late or not having read the resume, the values conflict we kind of talked about, lack of clarity in answering questions. Bait and switch is not that uncommon sometimes. They will be looking at a number of people for the particular job, and they might have someone in mind, but they're interviewing you for that job, but then they're thinking, but we can also maybe offer her or him another job. You want to be sure that the job you're interviewing for is the one they're offering, and not be in the bait and switch situation, because then they're just trying to put bodies in open positions. Scheduling the interview during off hours is not good. Inappropriate questions, I mean, I'm not even going to go there. You know, in this day and age, there should be no inappropriate questions. Lack of connection, that's what you feel, and resistance to change. Excessive number of interviews, a drawn out process. I would say you're interviewing them as well as they're interviewing you. So if it's in drawn out process, excessive number of interviews, I'd say look somewhere else. It looks like they can't get their act together, and the offer may be expiring, or they may be waiting for their friend or someone else to take the job. And then, so they're just stringing you along. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't go there. So those are some of the red flags. Green flags, we'll end on a more positive note. You're receiving positive responses like, that's correct, great answer, that's what we're looking for. Think about your nonverbal communication. What does your gut tell you? Are you comfortable and conversational with the person you're interviewing with? Do they seem engaged, relatable? They're clear about the next steps. Do they sound like they want you to come on board? Are your questions answered in full and not ambiguous? That's important. Look at the office environment. Look at the employees. Are they respectful of each other? Are they friendly? Do they greet you? Do you feel sold on the company? But again, do your homework on the internet, their website, LinkedIn, and anywhere else you can, because jobs nowadays, you don't want to go through this all the time. And once you interview and get on with a good company, stay there until for some reason you need to leave it. And this is a lot of work going through interviewing for these positions. So do your homework up front, and I think then you'll have a better outcome. So ask yourself, does it allow for the lifestyle I want? Is it interesting? Is it challenging? Does it satisfy my personal priorities? Does it fit my career goals? And give some thought to what your career goals are, especially if you're young or middle-aged. You know, you need to know what your career goals are so you can keep moving forward. Does the company share my criteria as an ideal employee and certainly my values? And then, of course, the red flags or the warning signs. So before you say yes, 5 things to think about. Money matters, as Janet talked about, the salary, the benefits, the hours, and travel, if travel's part of it. And travel is not part of every job, but there is a certain, if you're not at remote, it is travel to the job. So you have to think about traveling to get to the job. And the flexibility and the company culture and your personal circumstances. So these are the same reasons people choose to leave their jobs. And if you do the work up front, you can learn more about this interview process, asking questions, do your homework, be prepared. And then when you do have a job offer, you feel like you are you have the information, I should say. You have enough information that you're prepared to take this on. And the next slide is good luck finding your perfect job, with everybody doing the happy dance. And so with that, we are open to any questions you have or any way we can help you. You know, please take yourself off mute if you are on mute, and answer or ask away.
You know,